Emily Carter had never known silence to feel so loud. The apartment was still, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the uneven thump of her own pulse. On the closet door, the bridesmaid dress still hung, soft pink, chiffon fabric swaying slightly as if caught in a breeze. It looked almost innocent, almost sacred. Sophie Lane stood in front of it with a pair of steel scissors, her posture relaxed, her smirk sharp enough to cut before the blades even touched the fabric. Emily froze in the doorway. Her throat tightened, the words clinging to the back of her tongue, but Sophie spoke first. "It's just a dress, Emily. Grow up." The scissors sliced downward with a sound that made Emily's stomach drop. Swish. The chiffon split like skin under a knife, limp pieces spilling to the floor. Emily's knees trembled. Her hands balled into fists so tight, her nails dug crescent moons into her palms. She could feel the cold metal of the dining chair behind her calves, as if the apartment itself wanted her to sit down, surrender, let Sophie finish the desecration. But she didn't move. Emily's voice cracked, but her words were steady. "It wasn't just a dress. It was my trust, and you sold it for cash." Sophie chuckled, low and mocking, and let another ribbon of fabric fall. "Refunds aren't sentimental, Emily. Money doesn't remember promises." The words hit harder than the scissors. Emily's mind replayed the boutique's fluorescent lights, the laughter of bridesmaids trying on identical gowns, the promise of forever friendship sealed in lace and chiffon. And then the email. Refund issued to group leader Sophie Lane. The pit in her stomach since that day had never closed. Now the proof lay scattered at Sophie's feet, a pink heap shredded like confetti after a parade that never happened. On the kitchen counter, a paper fluttered loose from a folder. It was the boutique's refund statement. Coffee stains blurred the margins, but the bold black number glared through the smudge. 960.07. Emily stared at it the way a drowning person sees air bubbles drifting just out of reach. Her chest clenched. Sophie noticed her gaze and picked up the paper between two fingers. She twirled it like a playing card. Then, with a casual flick, she let it fall. E-flap. Flap. Flap. It landed on the tile, face up, the digits burning in the dim light. Emily could almost hear the courtroom already. The echo of heels on marble floors, the hum of fluorescent bulbs, the rustle of lawyers' suits. And above it all, the gavel. Like, actions have consequences. The phrase looped in her head like a drumbeat. Sophie believed there wouldn't be any. Sophie believed the system was hers, that friendship was a shield. But tomorrow, Emily thought, the gavel would fall. Her eyes caught on the corner of her desk. Propped against a stack of unopened mail was a photograph frame. Her and Sophie, arms looped, teeth bared in laughter. The bridesmaid dress pristine on its hanger in the background. A friendship that once seemed indestructible now lay in tatters, no stronger than the chiffon bleeding on the floor. Sophie leaned closer, her perfume sharp and invasive. "Shoulders, you won't need it. You don't even deserve the refund." Emily's lips parted, but no sound came out. The silence between them swelled, filling the room, pressing against her ribs. She tasted iron at the back of her throat. The scissors clattered to the floor. Sophie dusted her hands as though she had just finished a chore. Her smile widened, confident, cruel. "Go ahead, Em. Take me to court. Let's see who they believe. The successful marketing manager with receipts, or the schoolteacher still crying over a cancelled wedding." Emily's chest heaved, but her voice sharpened into steel. "They'll believe the truth. Even lies leave a paper trail." For the first time that night, Sophie's smile flickered. Only for a second. Emily reached for the chair behind her, steadying herself on the cold metal. The chill shot up her arm, rooting her in the present. She inhaled, exhaled, and let her gaze linger on Sophie as if imprinting every detail. The tilt of her chin, the arrogance in her eyes, the scissors abandoned on the carpet. This moment wasn't just anger. It was evidence. She bent down, picked up the refund slip and folded it carefully, as though it were a fragile relic rather than a weapon. Her hands no longer shook. In the corner, the clock ticked louder, each second a hammer against her skull. Time was moving forward, dragging them both toward the inevitable. Emily turned away before Sophie could say another word. She walked into her bedroom, closed the door, and pressed her back against it. Her breath came ragged, but her resolve was hardening like stone. On her nightstand, her trial folder sat open. Inside, copies of bank statements, boutique emails, text screenshots. Her arsenal? Her eyes caught another object, a brass paperweight in the shape of a gavel. A gift from her uncle years ago when she had told him she dreamed of studying law. She had never become a lawyer, never worn a robe or wielded authority, but tomorrow, when that real gavel struck wood, it would strike for her. She picked it up, feeling its weight. The brass was cool, almost biting. In her reflection on its surface, her eyes looked sharper, her jaw set. She whispered to herself, "Justice isn't stitched in fabric, it's woven in truth." The courtroom hummed with the restless energy of a hive. Shoes scuffed against marble. Whispers darted between rows of benches. Pens clicked in nervous fingers. A ceiling fan stirred the air, though nothing could cut through the weight pressing on Emily Carter's shoulders as she sat at the defense table. Her chair vibrated beneath her. Was it her legs trembling, or the hum of anticipation across the room? She couldn't tell. All she knew was the chill of the wooden armrest seeping into her skin and the sharp scent of polished oak rising from the floorboards. At the front of the room, Judge Rebecca Miller presided, her brass nameplate catching the fluorescent light like a sliver of gold. Each gleam felt like a warning. This room would slice truth from lies, but only if the truth could survive long enough to be heard. And right now, Sophie Lane was determined to bury it. She strode confidently to the witness stand, her black blazer crisp, her hair styled into loose waves that framed a face made for persuasion. Even her posture screamed credibility. She didn't look like a liar. She looked like someone about to deliver a keynote speech. When the bailiff swore her in, Sophie lifted her chin, eyes flicking briefly toward Emily as though to say, "Watch me win." The prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Caldwell, leaned against the podium. He didn't even have to coax her. Sophie had prepared her story, polished it, rehearsed it in front of mirrors until it gleamed like glass. "Miss Lane," Caldwell began, "could you explain to the court what happened with the bridesmaid dresses?" Sophie nodded solemnly, folding her hands as though in prayer. "Of course. We were all supposed to be bridesmaids for Emily's wedding last spring. She insisted on this boutique in Midtown. The dresses were $320 each steep, but Emily said, 'It's once in a lifetime. Don't be cheap.'" Her words dropped like stones into water, sending ripples through the gallery. A murmur rose. Some women shook their heads, lips pursed in disapproval, others raised eyebrows in sympathy. Sophie let the pause linger, then continued. "We trusted her. We bought the dresses. Then, just a month before the ceremony, she canceled the wedding. Completely. No explanation. Just gone. And when we asked about refunds, she said she'd handle it." She drew a tissue from her pocket, dabbed her eyes with delicate precision. Not a tear in sight, but the performance was enough. 2-8, the boutique told us the refund was processed, but instead of distributing it, Emily kept the money. $960. I lost $320 that I could barely afford, and she never gave a cent back. The words echoed, amplified by the courtroom walls. Emily felt the blow land in her gut. Kept the money. The phrase rang out like a guilty verdict before the trial even began. Around her, the audience shifted. A few nodded with sympathetic frowns. One older woman muttered, "Shameful," under her breath. At the prosecution table, Caldwell scribbled notes, a thin smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't need to prove much. Sophie was doing all the heavy lifting, painting herself as the betrayed friend, the responsible bridesmaid, the victim of selfish greed. Emily clenched her jaw until it ached. She wanted to leap up, to scream the truth, but her attorney had warned her. "Wait, watch, don't interrupt. Every lie becomes evidence when it unravels itself." So she sat. Her chair quivered again as she shifted her weight, knuckles white against the table. Her heart hammered, but her eyes remained sharp, fixed on Sophie with an intensity that might cut through steel. Sophie turned slightly toward the judge, her voice lowering into the register of sincerity. Your Honor, I didn't want to come here today. I value friendship. I value loyalty. But when someone betrays you like this, you have no choice. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because money matters, and promises matter. Her words wrapped around the gallery like silk. Heads bobbed in agreement. Emily spotted a young clerk at the side of the room. Daniel, barely 23, his notepad resting on his lap. His brow furrowed as Sophie spoke, his pen hovering above the paper but not moving. He looked uncertain, as if his instincts warned him something was off, but his silence was louder than any protest. Caldwell leaned closer, his tone almost admiring. Miss Lane, did Emily ever explicitly promise to return the refund to you and the other bridesmaids? Sophie's mouth curved in a tragic smile. Yes, she said. Don't worry, I'll make sure you get every penny back. That's what makes this so painful. It wasn't just money, it was betrayal. A collective sigh drifted through the benches. The narrative was perfect. Sophie, the faithful friend, robbed of both dollars and trust. Emily, the selfish bride who had abandoned love, loyalty, and responsibility. The boutique's receipt lay on the evidence table, coffee-stained but legible. Sophie gestured toward it with theatrical flair. And, look at the numbers. $960. That's 3 women's savings. Gone. I even put the payment on my credit card because Emily told me not to worry. She'd handle everything. And now I'm left with the debt. She placed a hand against her chest, as if steadying her heart. Her voice wavered at just the right pitch. I've worked so hard to build my life, Your Honor. Marketing isn't an easy field. Rent in this city isn't cheap. Goliath and cod. And instead of compassion, Emily gave us silence. The courtroom hummed again. A bailiff shifted his stance, uncomfortable. 2 women in the back whispered furiously, one mouthing the word selfish in Emily's direction. Emily sat straighter, but the movement only seemed to emphasize her isolation. Her lips pressed tight, her hands clenched in her lap. She looked small against the swell of sympathy gathering behind Sophie. But her eyes didn't flinch. They observed. Measured. Stored away every detail. The cadence of Sophie's false sorrow, the tilt of Caldwell's smirk, the way Judge Miller's pen tapped slowly against her notes. Every performance leaves fingerprints, Emily thought. And lies, no matter how polished, eventually betray themselves. Cantwell pressed on. So, Miss Lane, to be clear? Emily Carter received the refund from the boutique, correct? Yes. Sophie's voice was firm, unwavering. She received it, and she kept it. We never saw a dime. Emily's stomach twisted. She could feel the lie knotting itself around her like a rope. But instead of panic, a strange calm washed over her. She knew the rope would snap. Not now, not yet, but soon. For now, Sophie's version reigned supreme. The judge adjusted her glasses, eyes flicking between the receipt on the table and Sophie's poised figure. Thank you, Miss Lane, Judge Miller said. Her tone gave nothing away, but the weight of her words settled like a stone in Emily's chest. Sophie leaned back in the witness chair, triumphant. She crossed her legs with practiced elegance, letting her heel dangle casually as though she had already won. In the gallery, the whispers built momentum. A man muttered, "Why would she lie about that?" A woman added, "Exactly. No one would." Emily's chair groaned as she shifted again. The pressure bore down heavier now. The public opinion tilting against her. The prosecutor feeding off Sophie's performance. The silent weight of Daniel's hesitation. But beneath it all, Emily's gaze locked onto the coffee-stained receipt. The number $960 blazed under the fluorescent lights, sharp and undeniable. Sophie had paraded it as proof of her victimhood, but Emily knew it was the first crack in the facade. Because tomorrow, when the truth surfaced, that same number would flip the narrative. Emily let out a slow breath, steadying herself against the storm. She might look weak now, pressed into the shadows of Sophie's lies. Okay, but she wasn't broken. She was waiting. And in her silence, she held the sharpest weapon of all, patience. The courtroom was still buzzing from Sophie's testimony when Emily Carter rose to her feet. The wooden chair creaked behind her, the sound oddly small against the swell of whispers. Her palms were damp, her heart thudded like a drum in her ribs. But when she opened her mouth, her voice was steady. Not loud, not desperate, just calm. "Your Honor," she began, her tone as level as a line on ruled paper, "I never received that refund personally. Under contract law, the boutique transferred it back to the group account held in Sophie's name." The room stilled. The shift was almost physical. Where Sophie's testimony had been a storm of words, sobs, sighs, trembling hands, Emily's voice was a clear stream cutting straight through. Short, direct, without ornament. She let the silence sit for a moment, then continued. "The Uniform Commercial Code, Section 2-711, speaks clearly. Buyers who rightfully reject or revoke acceptance of goods are entitled to restitution. But that restitution must return to the party who paid." She paused again, eyes on Judge Rebecca Miller. The judge's pen stopped tapping. Emily's sentences landed one by one, deliberate, each carrying weight. "The boutique did not refund me. They refunded the group order. To Sophie Lane. That is the truth." A murmur rippled through the gallery, but quieter this time. Not the chorus of agreement that had greeted Sophie's words, but the tentative shifting of people reconsidering what they thought they knew. At the prosecution table, Caldwell leaned forward, pen frozen mid-note. On the bench at the side, young clerk Daniel straightened. For the first time all day, his pen scratched the page. His hesitation was cracking. Emily drew a slow breath, steadying herself. Fear still coiled in her stomach, but something deeper rose to the surface now. Not panic, not fragility. Resolve. She turned her eyes briefly to the evidence table where the boutique receipt lay, coffee stains spreading like bruises. The number 960.07 glared back. "That money never touched my account," she said, voice quiet but cutting. "Not 1 cent. The trail is there, clear as ink." She could feel Sophie's glare burning into her from the witness stand, but Emily didn't look at her. Not yet. She wasn't speaking to Sophie. She was speaking to the judge, to the jury of public opinion gathered in the benches, to the truth itself. Her hands rested lightly on the table. Her shoulders, once hunched, squared back. "When Sophie claims I stole from her, she is wrong. What she presents as betrayal is, in fact, projection. He received the funds. She held them, and she failed to return them to those who trusted her." Gasps. Whispers. One woman in the back turned to her neighbor, eyebrows lifting in doubt. Sophie shifted in her chair, crossing and uncrossing her legs, lips pressed thin. Emily pressed on. "I understand how convincing words can be. I understand how easily the truth is buried under performance. I've seen it before." Her voice dropped into memory. The courtroom blurred for a moment, replaced by the flicker of candles on her cousin's kitchen table years ago. Emily had been 19, watching her cousin Lydia sob over a crumpled receipt. Lydia's best friend had pocketed deposits meant for the wedding band, leaving Lydia bankrupt and humiliated. Emily remembered Lydia's words. "Ooh, she was my maid of honor. I'd rested her more than anyone, and she stole from me." That night, Emily had promised herself she would never let silence write the story again. Her eyes refocused on the courtroom. Her jaw tightened. "My cousin lost her wedding savings because no one spoke up for her. Because silence let the lie live. I swore I'd never let silence steal the truth again." The words rang in the air. The gallery was hushed. Daniel the clerk looked up, his pen still. His expression softened, a flicker of recognition. He had seen betrayals too. Emily let her gaze sweep the room. Sophie's face was tight with anger now, her earlier composure cracking. Caldwell scribbled furiously, jaw clenched. Judge Miller leaned forward, chin resting on her hand, eyes narrowed, not hostile, but intent. Listening. Emily straightened, her voice sharpening. "This case is not about dresses. It is not about friendship gone sour. It is about facts. Money moved from the boutique to Sophie's account. She claims victimhood while holding the funds. That is manipulation. The words landed like stones on the polished floor. Inside, Emily felt her heartbeat pounding, but the rhythm steadied her now. With every sentence, her fear shed like skin. What remained was something else. Clarity. She thinks the system protects her, Emily thought. She thinks friendship is a shield. But tomorrow, the gavel will fall. She looked down at her hands. They were no longer trembling. She folded them neatly on the table, the gesture simple but final. Her voice softened. I may not have Sophie's polish. I may not speak like an orator. But I have the truth. And I believe this court values truth above theatrics. For the first time since she'd entered this courtroom, the silence belonged to Emily, not Sophie. Even the air seemed to shift. The earlier current of sympathy for Sophie now eddied uncertainly, swirling with doubt. Emily caught Sophie's eyes at last. Calm met rage. For a heartbeat, Sophie looked away. Emily allowed herself the smallest exhale. She wasn't finished, not by a long stretch. But the balance had shifted. The air in the courtroom had thickened. The echoes of Emily's calm defense still lingered like smoke after a firework, but the room hadn't yet tipped fully in her favor. People leaned forward, expectant. Sophie shifted in her chair, arms crossed, the faintest smirk returning to her lips as though she believed Emily's momentum had peaked. Emily reached for her handbag. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, as though each second was stretched on purpose. The faint creak of the leather strap echoed in the silence. She slid her hand inside, fingers brushing against folders, envelopes, the edge of a stapled packet she had guarded like a secret weapon. When she pulled it out, the courtroom lights caught the glossy paper. Bank records. She laid them carefully on the table, the papers whispering against the polished wood. Then she lifted the top sheet and stepped toward the bailiff. Exhibit for the court, she said softly. Her voice carried not with volume, but with gravity. The bailiff delivered the packet to Judge Miller. The judge adjusted her glasses, flipped through the pages, and paused. Slow motion seemed to descend. The overhead lights struck the logo of the First National Bank in bold navy blue. Then, lower down, the digits stood out. 960.00. Highlighted, undeniable. A transfer, date stamped, routed directly into an account under the name Sophie Lane. A collective gasp swelled in the gallery. Sophie's smirk collapsed. Her jaw tightened. Color drained from her cheeks. Across the room, young clerk Daniel jolted so hard his pen slipped from his hand, clattering against the marble floor. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. He scrambled to pick it up, face flushed, but the noise only emphasized the moment's weight. At the prosecution table, Caldwell's pen froze mid-stroke. His lips parted, but no words came out. The confident curl at the corner of his mouth dissolved into flat disbelief. Emily let the silence stretch, savoring the unraveling. She turned, eyes fixed on Sophie. Her words were steady, sharp as glass. You said you lost money. The record says otherwise. The words landed with surgical precision, slicing through Sophie's performance like scissors through chiffon. Sophie opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her throat bobbed with a swallow that didn't quite go down. Judge Miller held the page up, eyes narrowing. Miss Lane, this transfer appears to be deposited into your account. Would you care to explain? The judge's tone was neutral, but the weight in it pressed Sophie back against the leather of her chair. She stammered. I don't. I mean, that was temporary. I intended. Emily cut in, her voice still quiet, but carrying more power than any shout. Intention doesn't erase evidence. Every head in the courtroom swiveled toward her. Her pulse thundered, but her expression was calm. She took a single step forward, her heels clicking lightly against the floor. This isn't about confusion. It isn't about misunderstanding. The money was refunded, and Sophie Lane kept it. The gallery erupted into whispers, some harsh, some incredulous. Sophie tried again, her voice rising higher than she meant. I was going to pay them back. Emily just. Emily's eyes held hers unflinching. You didn't steal money, Sophie. You stole my trust. And trust costs more than any dress. Gasps again, this time tinged with something more powerful. Recognition. The phrase etched itself into the air, into the minds of everyone present. Even the court stenographer's fingers hesitated for half a beat before clacking the words down. Daniel, still flustered from his dropped pen, looked at Emily with something like awe. Caldwell rubbed his temple, eyes darting across the bank statement as though searching for an escape hatch in the numbers. But there was none. The digits were merciless. Judge Miller tapped the document with her pen, each strike a metronome of inevitability. Miss Lane, this shows a deposit into your account. The court requires clarity. Were these funds ever distributed back to the other bridesmaids? Sophie's voice cracked. Not yet. But The judge's brow arched. Not yet. Or not ever. Sophie stuttered. The silence that followed was answer enough. Emily let out a slow breath. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times. Imagined the papers in her hand. Imagined Sophie's face collapsing under the weight of evidence. Yet standing here, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt heavier, more solemn, because this wasn't just about winning. It was about exposing. And exposure, she knew, left scars on everyone involved. The late nights copying documents, the pit in her stomach when she realized Sophie had lied, the promise she had made years ago watching her cousin Lydia fall apart over a stolen wedding fund. Never again, she had sworn. Never let silence steal the truth. Now, the silence had broken. Emily turned back to the judge, her voice steady. Your Honor, these documents are not speculation. They are certified by the bank. They show the money trail. The boutique refunded Sophie Lane. Not me. Her claim that I withheld the funds is not only false, it is inverted. She is the one who held them. The gallery's whispers swelled into an audible wave. One man muttered, Unbelievable. A woman shook her head, murmuring, All this time. Sophie sat rigid, her knuckles white against the wooden rail of the witness box. Her eyes darted from the documents to the judge to Emily, as if searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. Emily stood still, her body calm, her words sparse. She didn't need volume, she had proof. The moment hung in the air like the final beat of a drum before the cymbal crash. Judge Miller set the papers down. Her expression was unreadable, but the line of her jaw had tightened. The court acknowledges this evidence. Sophie flinched. Caldwell slumped back in his chair. Emily lowered her gaze briefly, her chest rising with a slow inhale. For the first time in months, the weight pressing down on her ribs eased. Not gone, but lighter. She whispered to herself, words almost swallowed by the stillness. Actions have consequences. The phrase was both promise and prophecy. And though the verdict had not yet been spoken, the tide had shifted. The court, the audience, even Sophie herself knew it. Emily Carter had revealed the truth. And nothing, not theatrics, not lies, not friendship twisted into a shield, could cover it again. The courtroom was no longer the same place it had been when Sophie first took the stand. The balance of the air itself seemed different now, thicker, sharper. Whispers rustled through the gallery like dry leaves in the wind, people leaning close to each other, eyebrows raised, jaws slack. At the center of it all stood Emily Carter, the quiet schoolteacher who had been painted as a thief just an hour before. Her shoulders were no longer curved inward. They squared, steady as a spine of steel. In her hands lay a folder. Within it, the truth. She approached the podium, papers stacked with military precision. Her voice, when it came, was calm, almost surgical. Your Honor, members of the court, I present the record of what really happened. The bailiff carried the documents forward, placing them before Judge Miller. A projector flicked to life at the side of the courtroom, screen humming, the first slide snapping into place. A bank statement. Slow zoom. The First National Bank logo in the top corner. The judge's nameplate gleamed in the light, echoing the gravity of the moment. Beneath the logo, highlighted, impossible to ignore, deposit, 96T$0. Account holder, Sophie Lane. The gallery gasped in unison. Emily's voice cut through the noise. Exhibit A, bank records confirming that the refund was processed into Miss Lane's personal account. Her tone was flat, unadorned, the kind of voice that didn't plead for belief. It demanded it. Caldwell, the prosecutor, shifted in his chair. He tapped his pen twice, then stopped. He had nothing to add, nothing to deflect. His eyes darted to Sophie, whose posture sagged like fabric losing its thread. The next slide clicked onto the projector. An email. Boutique letterhead. Date stamped. Subject line, confirmation. The words glowed against the screen. Refund issued to group leader Sophie Lane. Thank you for your business. Judge Miller's eyes narrowed, scanning the print. She adjusted her glasses, lips pressed into a line that spelled trouble. Emily spoke again, her words sharp as pins. Exhibit B. Direct confirmation from the boutique that the refund went to Miss Lane as the designated group leader. Not to me. Not to anyone else. Whispers rippled through the gallery. An older man in the back shook his head in disbelief. A woman leaned to her neighbor and whispered, "She lied about everything." On the stand, Sophie's face flushed crimson. She twisted the tissue in her hands until it shredded. But Emily wasn't finished. The screen flicked once more. A text message. Projected in high contrast, each bubble huge against the pale background. From Sophie Lane. Got the refund, but Emily won't notice. I'll figure out how to split it later. Or not. The words hung there like a blade. Gasps erupted, sharper this time, tinged with outrage. Someone in the gallery hissed. The court reporter's keys clattered, then paused for half a second as even she seemed to register the audacity of the message. Emily stood still, her eyes locked on Sophie. Exhibit C. A message. Miss Lane sent to another bridesmaid. Her own words. She let the silence breathe. Actions have consequences, Sophie. Even lies leave a paper trail. The phrase cracked through the room like lightning. Sophie's head jerked up, eyes wide. For the first time, her mask of control shattered. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but the words stumbled over each other. That was a joke. I didn't mean. Emily's gaze didn't waver. A joke doesn't deposit money. A joke doesn't show up in bank records. And a joke doesn't leave $960 missing from the people who trusted you. The gallery erupted. Murmurs, accusations, a rising tide of judgment pressing against the walls. The bailiff raised his hands for order, but the energy was uncontrollable now. Judge Miller slammed her gavel once. Order. The sound cracked like thunder and the room froze. All eyes returned to Sophie. Her hands shook as she clutched the wooden rail. Her face crumpled between fury and fear. Emily, however, stood serene. She didn't need volume, didn't need theatrics. The evidence spoke louder than anything she could shout. The projector clicked again. More text messages filled the screen. It's fine. Emily's too naive to notice. I deserve a break after everything she put us through. Only money. Each one, a nail hammered into Sophie's coffin. We lifted her chin. Your Honor, these are not isolated slips of the tongue. They are a pattern. A record of deception. Daniel, the young clerk, scribbled furiously in his notebook, his earlier hesitation gone. His face was flushed, eyes wide. He looked as if he had just watched a magician's trick reversed, the illusion destroyed to reveal the wires and mirrors beneath. Caldwell pressed his lips together, flipping uselessly through his notes. The evidence had left him stranded. No argument, no rhetoric could erase words typed by Sophie herself. Emily turned back to the judge, her final words simple. Miss Lane claimed I stole from her. The truth is, before you now. It was never mine to take. She received it. She kept it. And she lied about it under oath. Her voice, still calm, carried more weight than all of Sophie's earlier theatrics combined. The gallery was silent again. Not the silence of doubt, but the silence of realization. The kind that falls when everyone in the room knows a story has ended, even before the last line is spoken. Emily's eyes flicked once more to Sophie. Trust is more valuable than money. and you traded it for less than $1,000. Sophie's shoulders sagged. She buried her face in her shredded tissue, but it did nothing to shield her. The court had seen too much. Judge Miller leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled beneath her chin. Her expression was grave, but there was no mistaking the weight of the evidence she now held. Emily stepped back from the podium, her folder empty. Laid it all out. The projector clicked off. The room dimmed, shadows reclaiming the walls. The camera of every mind in that courtroom seemed to linger on one final image. The number, $960 blazing across the screen. The proof of betrayal glowing like a scar. Emily returned to her seat, lowering herself gently. The chair no longer trembled beneath her. She sat steady, her eyes forward. Sophie shifted again, but this time it wasn't confidence. It was collapse. The silence stretched until Judge Miller lifted her gavel. The polished wood caught the light, gleaming like a weapon. Bang! The sound reverberated through the chamber, into the bones of everyone present. The screen went black, and in bold white letters, the truth declared itself. She stole bridesmaid dress refund, court-ordered payback. The courtroom was no longer just a stage for a personal quarrel. The evidence had shattered Sophie's story, but Emily wasn't finished. She knew if she stopped here, her case would be remembered as a petty bridesmaid dispute. She wanted more, needed more, because what Sophie had done wasn't unique. It was a symptom of something larger, a pattern of betrayal cloaked in friendship, weaponized by trust. Emily rose again. The papers were gone, but her presence carried the same weight. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "this case is not only about me. It is not only about Sophie. It is about a system of silence that repeats itself in homes, in friendships, in wedding halls across this country." The gallery leaned forward. Even the judge's pen paused. Emily turned toward the benches, eyes sweeping across the faces. Strangers, clerks, reporters scribbling furiously. "Rachel. Nina." Her voice softened, but it carried. Two women in the back row stiffened. Rachel's lips pressed thin. Nina's eyes welled as she nodded almost imperceptibly. "They stood with me as bridesmaids. They paid for those dresses too. They never saw their refunds either. Sophie didn't just withhold my trust." Murmurs again, louder now. Heads turned, whispers laced with outrage. Emily gestured to the blank projector screen. "Aye, and we are not alone. Let's look at the numbers." The projector flickered back to life, displaying stark text across a black background. 63% of wedding refund disputes in the United States involve friends or bridesmaids. The words hung in the air. Nearly 2 out of 3 disputes like this one, Emily continued, aren't between strangers or companies or vendors. They are between people who once stood side by side. Friends, family. The people we are told to trust most. The next slide appeared. 41% of those disputes result in permanent loss of friendship. Gasps again, this time tinged with sadness. A woman in the gallery pressed a hand to her mouth. "Almost half of these stories," Emily said, "end not only in money lost, but in relationships destroyed. Bonds we believe unbreakable crumble under the weight of dollars and deceit." She let the silence stretch, then delivered the line like a knife. "This is not just about one dress. It's about how friendship is weaponized for profit." The phrase echoed, cutting through the gallery. Judge Miller leaned back slightly, her expression grave. Emily's voice hardened, gaining rhythm, each sentence clipped and deliberate. "I know what Sophie thought. She thought no one would notice, thought no one would care. She thought friendship was a shield she could hide behind." She turned, facing Sophie directly. "But tomorrow, the gavel will fall." The words struck the air like a hammer. The gallery erupted again, but this time it wasn't confusion or sympathy. It was anger, agreement. Emily returned her gaze to the projector. The image shifted once more, but this time it wasn't statistics. Yes, a photograph. Bridesmaid dress. Torn. Shredded. Pink fabric slashed by scissors. The room inhaled as one. "This," Emily said softly, "was supposed to be a symbol of unity. Instead, it was destroyed to prove a point. to mark possession, to erase trust. She paused, her voice breaking slightly but regaining its edge. Trust costs more than any dress. She let the image linger before motioning for the next slide. The boutique receipt appeared. Coffee stains smudged at the edges, but the bold number still burning in black ink. 960.US. The digits glowed on the screen like a wound. This is the number Sophie tried to hide. But lies cannot erase ink. They cannot erase records. They cannot erase the truth. Emily lifted her eyes to the gallery again. And if you think this is just one number, one refund, one wedding, ask yourself how many times this has happened in other towns, to other bridesmaids, to other friends, too afraid or too ashamed to speak. The silence was palpable. Even Sophie, who had been fidgeting relentlessly, now sat still, eyes downcast. Then Emily motioned one final time. The screen went dark. Then, slowly, a single image emerged. A wooden gavel, its head catching a sliver of light, its shadow stretching across the bench. The gallery shifted uneasily. Everyone knew what it meant, but Emily's voice made it undeniable. Lieges, the gavel will fall, and when it does, it will not only strike for me, it will strike for Rachel. For Nina. For every friend who ever trusted and was betrayed. For every voice silenced by fear. She turned back to Judge Miller, her final words ringing with quiet authority. We must not treat this as one woman's story. We must see it for what it is. A mirror held up to a system where betrayal hides in plain sight. Where friendship is turned into currency. Where silence feeds injustice. The words lingered in the still air. Heavy. Inescapable. Emily lowered her gaze, then stepped back. She didn't need to say more. The room was silent, but it wasn't the silence of disbelief anymore. It was the silence of reckoning. 3 images burned in everyone's mind. The cut pink dress. The stained receipt. The looming gavel. They were more than evidence. They were symbols. And each symbol carried a caption. Trust costs more than any dress. She thinks friendship is a shield. Ah, BS, but tomorrow the gavel will fall. The courtroom felt as if it had stopped breathing. The gavel lay idle on Judge Rebecca Miller's bench. Its shadow stretched long across the polished oak. For a moment, no one moved. Even Sophie Lane sat frozen, her shredded tissue limp in her fist. Judge Miller adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. The faintest echo carried through the chamber. She lifted the papers before her. Bank statements, boutique emails, screenshots of messages, and stacked them neatly. Her hands were steady. Her eyes, when they lifted to scan the room, were sharp as glass. After review of the evidence presented, she began, her voice low but resonant. This court has reached its decision. The gallery leaned forward as one. Sophie's breath hitched audibly. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes darted between the judge and Emily, desperate, searching for an escape. Emily, by contrast, sat motionless. Only her fingers twitched against the armrest of her chair, betraying the current of emotion beneath her calm. Judge Miller's tone grew firmer. This court finds that the refund of $960 was issued by the boutique to the account of Miss Sophie Lane. Not Emily Carter, not Rachel or Nina. Miss Lane alone. The words dropped like stones into water. Ripples of murmurs swept across the benches. Sophie flinched, her lips parting, but no sound emerged. Judge Miller raised her voice slightly, cutting through the noise. As such, the claim that Emily Carter wrongfully withheld these funds is without merit. To the contrary, this court recognizes that Miss Lane received the funds and failed to return them to her fellow bridesmaids. A wave of reaction surged, gasps, whispers, the shuffle of feet. The bailiff raised a hand for silence, though the words themselves had already quieted most. The judge's gaze fixed on Sophie, unyielding. This court orders Miss Sophie Lane to return $960 to the bridesmaids, Rachel, Nina, and Emily Carter. In addition, she will pay $500 in court costs for her false accusations and her misuse of this court's time. The gavel in Judge Miller's hand lifted an inch, then struck. BA. Dang. The sound echoed through the chamber, reverberating like thunder. Sophie's face collapsed. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes glassy, her lips trembling as if she might protest. But she didn't. She couldn't. The gallery erupted in murmurs, this time tinged with approval. A woman whispered, "Justice," under her breath. A man muttered, "Finally." But Judge Miller wasn't finished. She leaned forward, voice gaining a rhythm, her words striking like a drumbeat. "Let this serve as reminder. Friendship is not currency. Trust is not collateral. Lies are not investment." Each phrase landed heavy, deliberate, and unforgettable. The gallery hushed again. The repetition struck something primal, engraving itself into the minds of all who listened. Judge Miller paused, then delivered the line that would be remembered long after the court adjourned. "Justice is not stitched in fabric. It's woven in truth." The words rang through the chamber like a bell. For Emily, they hit harder than anything that had come before. Her chest tightened, her throat burned. She blinked rapidly, fighting the sting in her eyes. But the tears came anyway. They slicked down her cheeks, soft but unstoppable. Yet beneath the tears, a smile formed. Small, fragile at first, then steady. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't gloating. It was relief. Pure, unfiltered relief. She had carried the weight of betrayal for months. She had endured whispers, accusations, the heavy silence of disbelief. And now, with a single gavel strike, the burden lifted. Emily lowered her head into her hands for a moment, breath shuddering. When she raised it again, her eyes glistened, but the corners of her lips curved upward. A smile like dawn breaking through storm clouds. Rachel reached across the bench, squeezing Emily's hand. Nina followed, their fingers entwined over the polished wood. 3 women once bound by pink chiffon, now bound by something far stronger. Across the room, Sophie crumpled inward. Her once pristine blazer wrinkled, her carefully curled hair falling limp. She muttered something inaudible, shaking her head as though denial could still save her. But no one was listening anymore. Daniel, the young clerk, scribbled furiously, capturing the words of the judge. "Friendship is not currency. Honesty is not collateral. Always are not investment." He underlined the final proverb twice, his hand trembling from the gravity of it. He knew he would remember this day long after the ink dried. Emily exhaled again, steadying herself. She had imagined this moment countless times, but reality was sharper, more overwhelming. Judge Miller set down her papers, her voice softer now. "This court stands adjourned." The gavel struck once more. Bang! The audience rose in a wave of rustling fabric, footsteps scraping the marble floor. Reporters whispered about headlines, pens already sketching phrases. Rachel and Nina hugged Emily tightly, their arms a fortress around her trembling frame. For a brief second, Emily closed her eyes. She saw the dress pink chiffon shredded on the floor. She saw the coffee-stained receipt, the digits burning like fire. She saw the gavel's shadow stretched across the bench. And then she saw this moment. The verdict, the truth, the release. Her tears came again, but this time they were not born of grief. They were the tears of a woman who had stood against lies and won. As she stepped away from the defense table, Emily glanced once at Sophie. Their eyes met for the briefest heartbeat. Emily's look was not cruel, not vindictive, only resolute. "You didn't steal money," Emily whispered, barely audible. "You stole trust." Sophie flinched, gaze dropping. Emily turned, walking toward the gallery doors. Each step felt lighter than the last. Behind her, the chamber hummed with the echo of judgment. Ahead, the air smelled sweeter, as though freedom itself lingered just outside. And through it all, Judge Miller's words replayed in her mind, seared into memory. "A friendship is not currency. Trust is not collateral. Lies are not investment. Justice is not stitched in fabric. It's woven in truth." The verdict had been delivered, but its echoes did not stop at the courtroom door. Like ripples spreading from a stone cast into water, the consequences rolled outward, across lives, across communities, across strangers who would never meet Emily Carter but would know her story. For Sophie Lane, the descent was swift and merciless. By the time she returned home, her phone vibrated non-stop. Notifications stacked like bricks. Posts multiplied across social media. Screenshots of the court documents, Emily's steady words, the judge's unforgettable line. Justice is not stitched in fabric, it's woven in truth. On Sophie's own profiles, the comments surged. So you really kept the money? Lying under oath? Disgusting. Trust is priceless, and you sold it for $960. Her followers dwindled. Her professional contacts unfollowed quietly, but the absence was louder than insults. Within days, her marketing firm placed her on administrative leave, citing reputational damage. She had built her career on persuasion, on image, on credibility. And in one afternoon, all of it dissolved. Sophie scrolled through the messages late at night, eyes bloodshot, fingers trembling. But no amount of denial could silence the chorus. The truth had escaped the courtroom and taken on a life of its own. For Emily, the aftermath was different. Her phone buzzed too, but with gratitude. Messages poured in from strangers across the country. Women who had lost deposits to fraudulent planners. Men who had trusted groomsmen with money only to be betrayed. Parents who had been silenced by contracts and fine print. They wrote, "Thank you for standing up. Your story gave me courage. Because of you, I'm filing my claim tomorrow." Emily walked through her neighborhood, and people she had never spoken to nodded at her, whispered her name. At the grocery store, a woman touched her arm gently. "You spoke for all of us," she said, voice thick with emotion. At first, Emily flushed with embarrassment. He hadn't sought fame. She had only wanted justice. But gradually, she realized justice rarely stayed confined to the individual. Truth, once spoken, belonged to everyone. Rachel and Nina found strength in that truth as well. For Rachel, the betrayal had rekindled an old wound. Her deposit stolen years ago by a wedding planner who vanished overnight. She had buried the anger, convinced no one would believe her. But watching Emily stand, watching the judge strike Sophie's lies apart, something cracked open. 2 weeks later, Rachel walked into the county clerk's office with a folder of her own. She filed a lawsuit against the planner, attaching the faded receipt she had kept all these years. Her hands shook as she signed the papers, but her smile was steady. Nina, too, felt emboldened. She joined Rachel, serving as witness and support. She told reporters, "We stayed quiet once. We won't stay quiet again." And then, there was Daniel, the young clerk who had watched everything unfold from his small seat at the side of the courtroom. When he began his internship, he had thought of the law as paperwork and routine. But that trial had shattered the illusion. He had seen lies dressed as truth, trust stripped for profit, silence nearly win. He had also seen one woman stand calmly, patiently, and shift the tide with nothing but evidence and conviction. The words still echoed in his notebook. Friendship is not currency. Waitress is not collateral. Lies are not investment. Underlined twice, circled in the margin, his pen marks trembling. Weeks later, Daniel sat in his apartment, LSAT prep books stacked around him. His decision was made. He would not fade into clerical anonymity. He would study consumer protection law, dedicate himself to defending those who lacked voices or resources. When he told his supervisor, she nodded knowingly. "That trial changes people," she said. "It changed you. Let it guide you." The community changed too. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines blared across websites. Bridesmaid betrayal ends in courtroom showdown. Judge delivers stinging lesson. Vice is not collateral. Clips of Emily's words circulated online, edited into short videos that spread faster than Sophie could delete her accounts. Students in law schools dissected the case, professors pointing out the balance between contract law and moral duty. Bloggers wrote essays about friendship, betrayal, and money. Talk shows debated whether wedding culture had become a breeding ground for financial abuse. The trial had begun as a single fight over $960. It had ended as a national conversation. At the courthouse itself, the impact was memorialized in brass. Weeks after the verdict, maintenance workers climbed ladders, polished wood, and drilled into the marble wall. When they descended, a new plaque gleamed under the fluorescent lights. It read, "The Hall of Fair Promises." Visitors stopped to read it, fingers brushing over the letters. Some smiled, some frowned, lost in their own memories of promises broken. But all of them remembered the story that had birthed it. For Emily, the plaque was bittersweet. She visited it once, on a quiet afternoon when the courthouse was nearly empty. She stood before the gleaming words, her reflection faintly visible in the brass. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Promises should never be measured in dollars." Her tears welled again, but they were softer this time. Not grief, not rage, just release. She left the courthouse and walked into the sunlight, the air fresh and cool on her face. The future stretched uncertain before her, but lighter. She had scars, yes, but she had also become something unexpected, a symbol. Not a symbol of betrayal, not of bitterness, but of resilience, of truth spoken in the face of lies. Meanwhile, Sophie retreated into silence. She deleted accounts, avoided cameras, ignored calls. But silence didn't erase the stain. At bars, whispers followed her. At networking events, doors closed politely but firmly. She learned day by day that reputation, once sold, could not be bought back. Her name, once associated with ambition and charisma, was now a cautionary tale. Emily's name, in contrast, traveled farther than she ever imagined. Her words became captions, printed on posters, shared in feeds, whispered in dorm rooms where friends fought over rent money. Trust costs more than any dress. She thinks friendship is a shield. Pia. But tomorrow, the gavel will fall. They were no longer just lines in a courtroom. They were warnings. They were lessons. They were rallying cries. In time, Emily returned to teaching. Her students didn't treat her differently. Children rarely followed courtroom drama. But parents shook her hand at pickup, their gratitude unspoken but palpable. Colleagues offered quiet nods of respect. And at night, when she lay awake, she thought of Lydia, her cousin whose trust had been stolen years ago. She hoped Lydia would see this, would know that silence no longer held power. That one voice, patient and steady, could break the cycle. The story was no longer Emily's alone. It belonged to Rachel, to Nina, to Daniel, to strangers across the country who drew courage from it. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told, "It's just money. Don't make a fuss." And it belonged to the courthouse itself, its plaque gleaming like a vow. The Hall of Fair Promises. The courthouse doors groaned open, spilling golden afternoon light onto the marble steps. Reporters surged forward, microphones bristling like a field of steel reeds. Camera flashes exploded, each burst a miniature lightning strike. The hum of voices built into a storm, and at the center of it all walked Emily Carter. Her cheeks were still wet from tears shed inside the courtroom, but her posture was steady now, her chin lifted. She looked smaller than the tidal wave of attention surrounding her, yet the weight she carried was larger than anyone else's. The microphones collided toward her like arrows. Questions ricocheted. "Emily, how do you feel? Do you think Sophie will pay? Was it worth all the trouble?" She raised a hand. The crowd quieted, as though some unspoken authority had slipped into her voice. Emily inhaled, the air crisp in her lungs, then spoke with a clarity that sliced through the chaos. "Silence only feeds injustice. Lies kill faster than fists. Share this story, so no woman ever loses her savings and her friendship to betrayal again." The words landed heavy, rippling across the crowd. Some reporters froze mid-scribble. A few lowered their cameras slightly, as though the lens itself wasn't enough to capture what she had just said. Emily's gaze shifted. She looked not at the journalists, nor at the courthouse behind her, but directly into one of the cameras. Her pupils locked with the lens as though she could see through it, into living rooms, into phones, into the eyes of people far beyond these steps. Her voice dropped, softer but sharper than glass. "If you're watching this, maybe you lent money. You trusted someone. Hear me, your trust counts. Share this story. For a moment, the crowd seemed to dissolve. It was no longer a press conference. It was a conversation, one voice to another. A schoolteacher speaking directly to the betrayed, the silenced, the forgotten. Behind her, Rachel and Nina stood side by side, their hands clasped. The reporters caught it, lenses zooming, flashes multiplying. But the power was not in the photograph. It was in the solidarity. Emily continued, her cadence building, each phrase a stone in a rising wall. This was never just about $960. This was about trust, turned into collateral. This was about friendship used as currency. This was about silence pretending to be safety. She shook her head once, firm. It is not safe. It never was. The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Others whispered. But Emily's eyes never left the lens. She spoke the line that would go viral, carved into captions, repeated across screens. Actions have consequences. And tonight, consequence was stitched back into justice. Gasps followed, not because the words were complicated, but because they were simple, irrefutable, memorable. Behind the barricades, a young woman whispered to her friend. That's it. That's the line. A cameraman mouthed the words as he adjusted his focus. The stenographer inside the court, still packing up her equipment, scribbled it in the margin of her notebook. Emily stepped back, her statement finished, but she turned once more to the reporters, her voice carrying a final plea, not just call to action, but call to purpose. Don't let this be my story alone. Make it ours. Share it. So those who have been betrayed, those who have been silenced, can finally be seen. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The shutters paused. The murmurs stopped. Even the traffic beyond the courthouse seemed to hush. Then the storm resumed. Shouts of her name, the thunder of questions, the lightning of flashbulbs. But the heart of the moment had already passed. Emily had carved her words into the air and into the record. As she stepped down from the marble steps, Rachel and Nina fell into stride beside her. The three women walked together through the throng, flashes bursting like stars overhead. Somewhere in the crowd, Daniel the clerk watched, notebook still in hand. He had written every word. He knew he would never forget them. And as the doors of a waiting car opened, as Emily disappeared inside, the crowd repeated the line she had given them, over and over like a chant. Actions have consequences, and tonight, consequence was stitched back into justice.